Well, hello there, Paul Fitzgerald here, and thanks for giving me the privilege to have a chat with you for a short while during your busy day. What we're going to be talking about is how you can achieve some key goals in your practice. I'm going to be showing you how you can take some action immediately to put some things in place that will significantly improve how your practice runs. It'll help you get better patient outcomes and also reduce your risk of burnout. Now, is burnout a real issue? Well, over half of clinicians surveyed have burnout of some sort in their careers. Now, in a recent New England Journal of Medicine report, the admin load was by far and away the single biggest cause of burnout in clinicians, up about 62%. Now, I'm going to show you some ways today that you can reduce your admin load. So let me ask you a question first. What if your practice was profitable? What if you had happy staff who love their job? What if you're blessed with patients who love you and what you do and tell others about it? Would that give you peace of mind, let you sleep better at night, maybe reduce your risk of burnout completely, knowing that you're building a legacy and a valuable asset for your long-term future? Or would you love to retire when you want to retire and not have to practice until you're 80? Well, if this has got your attention, then guess what? You're in the right place. So this session is going to be for you if you're a clinician who wants to improve your practice. If you're a practice owner who is tired of staff and HR issues. If you're a professional who's prepared to learn and improve. And also for owners who want to understand and manage their risk. So conversely, this is not going to be for you if you are doing just fine. If you're a clinician who's on track to retire on your own terms. It's not for you if you're a professional who has no HR issues. And it's certainly not for you if you're not willing to make some positive changes in your life. So if that is you, please sign off now, and I do wish you the best. Now, if you're still here, you may be wondering why I'm doing this. Well, I'm looking for some like-minded individuals who are interested in learning about risk and how to manage it, who are interested in creating a profitable practice, who want to have happy and productive staff, and also who want to have patients who love you and tell you how great you are, or tell others how great you are. Now, I don't know if that's you yet, but we'll see. So in the next 30 minutes or so, what I'm going to do is show you three things. The first one is to identify risk and how to manage it. Then we'll talk about the secrets to managing staff. And guess what? There is no secret sauce. But there are some things that you can do to put in practice now which will reduce the burden and the stress of HR. And the third thing we'll talk about is 5 ways to reduce your privacy and cyber vulnerabilities. And we'll give you some practical examples of things you can do right now to reduce this risk. So by following these steps, you're going to be able to have a practice that lets you spend more time with patients and less on admin. You'll have less chance of medical mistakes, which means less risk of unhappy patients, or worse, litigation. And it'll also improve your patient outcomes because you're going to have time to do things correctly without stress. Now here's why you should listen to me. I've worked in the healthcare industry across multiple care settings for over 30 years. Now I started life as a pharmaceutical rep, calling on doctors and pharmacies, then specialists and hospitals. During this time I got a first-hand look at how practices run, the good, the bad, and in some cases the downright ugly. I also worked with medical device companies and then healthcare IT companies. I've run multinational companies and startups, all in healthcare. I was a senior executive in several of these and then left to work as a consultant in startups, which means I have come across and learned how to fix most of the problems you face on a day-to-day basis. I've got extensive experience in people management. I've hired and fired staff and have managed large and small teams, both directly and remotely. So I do know how hard staff can be, and also how hard it can be to get the right people in the first place, but also how hard it can be to get rid of the wrong people. And finally, I'm a cyber and privacy risk expert, especially in regard to healthcare. Now, I've seen and experienced some real shockers when it comes to security, or what sometimes passes for security. Now, just to allay any fears you may have about a hard sell coming up, there is nothing on sale here today. You can't buy anything from me, so keep your wallet safely closed. But if you do stay until the end, I'll have a gift for you that will dramatically change your results when it comes to building a successful and a sustainable practice. And also a way to have all your questions answered for free. So are you doing things the hard way? Are you constantly chasing cash flow? Is cash flow a constant source of worry for you? And does an irregular money flow stop you doing things in your practice or in your private life? Do you have any idea of your risk profile or how to manage it? Have you ever actually sat down and thought about risk in the business? You have locks on your doors, I'm sure, but do your staff have strong passwords on their computers, passwords that are changed frequently? Or does your practice actually share login details? Staffing issues, hiring, firing, performance management. Do staff give you reflux whenever you think about them? What about when you come to hiring or firing someone? Do you have a formula to do this? Are you at risk of harassment claims or bullying claims worse? Would you actually know if this stuff is going on in your practice? Is there zero or little marketing or patient engagement happening in your practice? Do patients just turn up and sit for long periods of time in your waiting room? Or are they greeted with a smile and a positive vibe when they walk in? Are they engaged and educated? Can they access information that's relevant to them via an online portal or your website? How about the simple act of making an appointment? Can they get an urgent appointment if they need one? Or are they simply told, sorry, no appointments today? And do you find it hard to find advice on how to run your practice as a business? Now, there are thousands of small business consultants out there, but how many actually understand healthcare? It doesn't have to be this way. As Dr. Corey Schuller points out, it doesn't matter how smart the doctor is. If they can't keep the lights on, they can't help anyone. So let me tell you about an easier way. Your practice can run smoothly and have staff who are trained and actually enjoy their work. Your practice can also be profitable, allowing you to retire on your own terms. Your patients can love you and your practice and shout from the rooftops about how great you are. And you can easily understand your risk universe and how to manage it. And we'll talk a bit more detail about this a bit later on. Now, I should point out that it's important to understand that the results will depend entirely on how you engage with this program and implement whatever you learn. Now, I can give you the tools and all the information you need to improve your practice dramatically, but the future is in your hands. So, first up, let me reveal how to identify risk and then manage it. So let me tell you an interesting story about a clinician who thought he was insured for cyber events in this case. Recently, I had a discussion with a medical doctor about privacy, security, insurance and other things. Now for this exercise, let's call him Bob. Now Bob told me that he thought his insurance cover from his medical defence organisation covered him for cyber liability. Now I suggested that maybe it would be worth checking the fine print. The other day Bob called me to say that he'd checked with the MDO about cyber cover. Now after this discussion, I immediately thought of two songs that summed it up perfectly. Things That Make You Go by CNC Music Factory. And the other one was How Bizarre by OMC. Now according to his insurer, Bob is covered for actual or alleged breaches of privacy or confidentiality. Sounds fine. However, his policy excluded fines, such as those that could be imposed by the Privacy Commissioner. It excluded damages awarded by the courts in the case of a civil claim, or any repayments to Medicare. Now additionally, there are other exposures like the impact on the practice through loss of revenue, forensic investigations and remediation costs, which weren't covered either. So what's the potential financial impact for Bob if his practice has a cyber event? Well, he could have regulatory fines imposed by the Privacy Commissioner. He could quite possibly have damages awarded by the Privacy Commissioner, and in recent cases they've averaged around $15,000 for each claimant in the case of a health data breach. So under the new mandatory reporting laws that come into law in February next year, just to remedy the breach, based on 1,500 compromised patient records, the costs could escalate well beyond $1 million. If you then add in other fines and damages, then the amount not insured would cost most people their business, their home, and maybe more. So what to do and what should be covered? Well, in this case, Bob needs to consider a specific cyber liability policy that's tailored to his needs, his actual risk, and his risk appetite. To do this, he needs to first understand his risk profile and his financial exposure, including any potential vulnerabilities. Now, something we've encountered in assisting healthcare professionals is that many practices have informal policies around privacy and cybersecurity, but these are often just what we do, as opposed to being formally implemented in writing and in practice. Now, undertaking a risk assessment is likely to provide a much higher probability that you'll get cyber insurance and perhaps a discounted premium. Additionally, it helps your practice with any future accreditation requirements, and if you have a breach, it will help to minimise the fallout because you actually took privacy seriously and proved it by addressing any vulnerabilities. Now, before you get offended, I know everyone really does take privacy seriously, but can you prove it to anyone? So, how to identify risk and manage it? The first thing is, as part of your business planning process, identify all your areas of risk and create a plan about how you're going to manage this. It should cover disaster recovery, loss of key staff, medical misadventure, or illness on your part. Risk comes in many forms. It can be fire, it could be burglary, it can be staff filing vexatious claims against a practice, or maybe even well-founded claims. It could be your practice is located in a flood zone. Or maybe it's just the fact that your business partner is a lot older than you that could create risk. What if something happened to him or her? Would the practice continue without major impact? And do you have an agreement in place that clearly defines what happens to the equity of each partner if something were to happen to them? The second thing you need to do is to establish policies and procedures and ensure that your staff are trained properly, and make sure these policies and procedures are written down. Your staff may be very good at what they do, but does your practice have a policy and procedure manual on how to handle most of the things that happen on a day-to-day basis? As I said, are they written down? Usually everyone just gets on and does things. The policies do need to be written so that you can point to them and say, we enforce these. Just as important is the need to actually train your staff on these policies and procedures. Do you have an induction program? Does your practice provide regular staff training to ensure everyone knows the importance of specimen handling, for example, or the absolute necessity for patient information to be kept private? You should review your insurances to make sure that you're appropriately insured, especially for any risks that you just can't control. Now, everyone hates to pay for insurance, we understand that, but it is a fact of life that we need it. You should regularly review your insurance coverage. Is it adequate for fire, flood, all those physical risks? How about key person insurance, income protection, cyber liability? I'd suggest you find a great broker who understands healthcare and work with them collaboratively to ensure that your risk appetite is married up with the appropriate cover. The other thing you need to do is review any specific standards applicable to your practice and ensure that you're complying with those. Standards are a bit like insurance. We need them, but everyone hates the compliance part. Getting ready for accreditation can be a nightmare if you wait until a few weeks before the assessors are going to walk in the door. If you get the practice in order now and maintain a well-run business, the accreditation will in most cases look after itself. As part of your business planning process, you should be reviewing the appropriate accreditation standards to which you need to be accountable. Making subtle changes in the way you work as the standards evolve will be much more pleasant than trying to do a major catch-up every couple of years. Now, how does this work in your situation? When you understand your risk, you can sensibly manage it, and that means you can sleep at night. So the first step is, do you have a business plan? Having a plan will also give you the confidence that the practice is running like a well-oiled machine. You'll be comfortable in the knowledge that your insurance cover is appropriate, and if worst case things happen, you'll be able to carry on. And if you don't have a business plan, how do you know where you're going? How will you know when you get there? As someone famous once said, fail to plan, plan to fail. As I said, you do need to have a business plan. If you don't know how to do a plan, there are hundreds of small business consultants out there, or there are free templates on Google, but you really do need to have a plan. So in this plan, you need to identify the risks that are going to face your business. Things like physical risks, as we talked about before, the fires, floods, that type of thing. There's a human risk, staff, intruders. Are you aware that over half of privacy breaches are caused by staff, internal people? And it's usually an oops moment, it's not normally malicious. There's patient harm. The more busy you are, the more stressed and worried about running things, the less time you have to spend with your patients. If you rush consultations, that equals less care, leading to a higher probability of harm being caused. And there's technology. What happens if the server fails? What if there's a long-term power outage due to a fire or a flood or that type of thing? What happens if that server that lives under the bench in the kitchen gets someone's lunch spilled all over it? So once you've identified the risks in the business, you need to firstly decide your risk appetite. So if you have a couple of $1 million sitting in the bank, Well, firstly, you probably don't need to be here. But if you did, you may say, well, okay, I can self-insure for some of this stuff. It's more likely that you don't have that sort of disposable cash. So you do need to decide, either individually or with your business partners, just how much risk is okay. That will be a decision that only you can come to, but you do need to consider it. Wherever possible, eliminate the risk. Perhaps it's as simple as deciding that disaster recovery looks more like having a practice management solution that's hosted in the cloud. So backups, accessibility is more or less guaranteed no matter what happens, as opposed to that server in the lunchroom that could wear someone's cup of soup. That means that a possible major risk is no longer a worry, and you can move on to the next one. Eliminate things that produce undue risk. Now, some things obviously can't be eliminated, but some can. If your location is in a flood-prone area, is it an option to relocate? You get the picture. And finally, once you've worked out what you can and must live with, you need to insure for that uncontrollable risk. A good broker, as I said, can help you through this process. And if you find one who understands healthcare, it'll be a much easier process. So next, the secrets of managing staff. Let's talk about HR. Before I teach you how to do this, let me tell you about a practice that allowed bullying to fester. This practice was a specialist medical practice, where the doctors allowed the practice manager to run the business pretty much without restraint. She hired, fired, did the banking, all those sort of things that practice managers normally do. What they didn't realise, and I suspect they still don't, is that this practice manager was a bully. She wasn't the stand over and yell in your face type of bully, but she was much too clever for that. She was just passive aggressive. She quietly worked on individual staff members to create divisions with other staff members. Like, she would say hello to certain people when they walked in and not to others. She would purposely change rosters or patient bookings without telling the clinicians involved. She was rude to patients. She spent much of her day dealing with personal issues involving her family. And after several staff left of their own accord, she would then happily set away, getting her sights on the next one. When a key clinical contractor complained about her to the principals, they asked the clinician to document the bullying. Now, that's pretty hard to do. I mean, how do you document that X didn't say hello this morning but did to everybody else? It looks fairly petty when you write it down. But it is still bullying. When this clinician complained again, the principals brought in a human relations expert from the AMA to lecture everyone in the practice about just how bad bullying is and not to do it. Now, nothing happened for a week or two. Then the bullying kicked back in with a vengeance, because the practice manager knew exactly who had dobbed her into the principals. Now, the principals went on their merry way, thinking everything was hunky-dory now because they'd fixed the problem. Until late one Thursday afternoon, the clinician simply walked into the principal's office and resigned on the spot. Patients had to be cancelled the next day, life was in upheaval, and I actually think to this day they still have no idea what happened. They were very lucky to have avoided legal action against their inaction. So there is a simple way to manage staff, and here's how you can do it. The first thing is to ensure that when you hire people, you have a set of criteria to which you manage the interview process. Now, get help if you need it. For example, use a recruiter. You do need a clear and precise position or role description, which defines very clearly the role and the expectations of you and the practice. Be very clear on what is and is not allowed. For example, use of personal phones during work hours, use of the practice internet to access Facebook and that type of thing. As I said, be clear and ensure that when you hire someone, they know this. If you don't know how to do this, use a recruiter, as I said. The professional bodies that represent your area will also have templates for interviewing and for the role descriptions. You should also set up induction and training programs. When someone starts in your practice, make sure you're there on their first day to welcome them and show them around the practice. You need to induct this person on fire procedures and accessing information on the network and other policies and procedures. Now, this could be an hour, a week, depends on how thorough you want to be. At a minimum, you need to be able to sign off and have them sign off that they've been shown the fire procedures and other policies and procedures. If you don't do this, it could come back to bite you. Imagine, heaven forbid, you have a fire in the practice and that new person who started last week didn't know what to do and was injured or worse. Liability would be swift and costly. Your staff should have regular training provided to them to keep them up to date. This could be a mixture of online or face-to-face, or at least some required reading that provides them with updates or revisions of the practice policies and procedures. Remember, we said these need to be written down. The other thing you need to do is conduct regular performance reviews and provide feedback to your staff. And staff need and thrive on positive feedback. If you do need to give negative feedback, try and do so in a constructive way. Now, on these points, outsource it if you need to, but it must be done. So how does this apply to you? Let me show you. If your staff have clear policies and procedures that have been trained during induction and regularly afterwards, they will work more productively and be happier. And this will flow back to your patients. Happy staff, and they will be happy if they know they're treated fairly and given feedback, will look after your interests much better than unhappy staff. If your staff are unhappy, and by the way, it is your job to know this, then at best they may put off your patients. But at worst, they may actually steal from you or sink your business completely. It's imperative that you interact with your staff. Now, by this I don't mean you should be going out for drinks with them on Friday nights and being best friends with them, but you do need to know how they're feeling. Induct them, train them, and provide feedback. And now I'd like to show you 5 ways to reduce your privacy and cyber vulnerabilities. So here's a story you may find interesting. What actually happens if you have a data breach? A healthcare record can fetch up to $50 on the black market. This is compared to around $3 for a credit card. So you can see why criminals would want to get to your data. If the average 2-doctor practice has around 4,000 records, that's big money for the thieves. With this data, the criminals can actually pursue insurance fraud, prescription fraud, or just plain vanilla identity theft. Another rising and worrying trend is the use of someone's personal details to access medical care for somebody else. Now, if your practice has a data breach, the Privacy Commissioner can fine you up to $1.8 million for a company, or up to $350,000 for an individual. Now, on top of this, there's a huge reputational loss. On average, practices can lose up to half of their patients. From February 2018, new legislation kicks in that will enforce mandatory breach notification. So all healthcare practices will be obliged to report any data or privacy breach to the Privacy Commissioner, to AHPRA, and to the affected patients themselves. And that's the big kicker, because that's going to open the Pandora's box of class action litigation. Now, the cost of reparation for a breach averages around $350 per record. So again, that average practice with 4,000 records, that runs to around $1.4 million. Normal practice insurances do not cover this sort of loss. Could your practice survive this? So how do you do it? Let me tell you. The first thing to do is to run a complete risk assessment of the practice. Many practices adopted electronic health recording systems when there were no clear guidelines on what these systems should contain. This means that a practice could be using electronic systems that are not compliant with current standards. To ensure compliance, a risk assessment should be done on the current systems to highlight areas in which compliance is not enforced. Also to expose areas in which changes are needed. So always ensure that the latest version is being used, including any security patches from the vendor. The risk assessment should also look at policies and procedures that are in place to manage access to personally identifiable information. Always prepare for disaster before it occurs. It's no good coming in and thinking, what the heck do we do now when the place burnt down last night? So all data handled by medical practice should be safe from both loss and corruption. One of the main ways of ensuring that data is not lost is through backups. Data should be backed up in an off-site location to ensure that in case of incidents of natural or man-made disasters, that data backup is not destroyed as well. Antivirus programs need to be installed and, more importantly, kept up to date on all computers in the practice. Also, that prevents data corruption from viruses, and also can protect against ransom. Implement an ongoing employee training program. That's been a common theme through this presentation. Any system is only as strong as its weakest link. And in some cases, it's poorly trained employees, or often temporary staff, who are the entry point for hackers into healthcare practices. It's also these staff who are more likely to have that oops moment and accidentally release confidential information. A practice may have excellent processes and systems, but if the employees are not using their passwords to securely access records and files, then the system security is just useless. And anyone can get access to these records then. Practices need to continually train their staff on how to follow the right security protocols and ensure that data integrity and security is there. The fourth thing is to purchase equipment with security, compliance and compatibility in mind. If you're buying new equipment for the practice, it should be compatible with existing systems and should offer enough security features. With the advent of connected devices, the so-called Internet of Things, it's critical these devices are secure, and again, more importantly, they are kept up to date. Before making any major purchases, make sure that you review the products thoroughly so you ensure that security and compatibility is going to be met. And this goes for diagnostic equipment, computers, and even for printers. And the final thing is to collaborate with affected parties. Changes that need to be made to bring about cybersecurity and privacy compliance affect many people in the practice. Affected groups should be offered training, and management must ensure that staff understand the importance of compliance to everyone in the practice. This applies to outside contractors as well. Also, ensure that your key staff are trained on what to do if there is a breach. A comprehensive disaster plan is essential, and you really do need to practice it on a regular basis. If you're wondering how you can use this, then here's how. Now, I've conducted numerous risk assessments across Australia and overseas. Almost all of these had serious flaws in their security, especially how sensitive information is handled and stored. User access to personally identifiable information must be on an as-needs basis. Always work on the principle of least access. If you make sure that passwords are strong and change regularly, and that all backups are encrypted both at rest and in transit, and store them offsite in a secure environment, then you'll be going a long way to progressing this. And by the way, the practice manager's handbag is not an appropriate place to put that backup. All these firms fix the issues, which help with their accreditation and in some cases reduce their insurance premiums. By focusing on risk management, planning and understanding your risk, your patients will be better off. Now, I promised you 3 things today. The first one was how to identify risk and then manage it. The second one was the secrets of managing staff. And the third was to give you 5 ways to reduce your privacy and cyber vulnerabilities. So, how did I do? Now here's the real opportunity that I see for you. You can have a high performing practice with happy staff leading to happy patients. By managing risk, you can be more profitable, meaning an exit at your pace. Now, many practices are being bought up by corporates. If you have a well-run practice, you'll optimise your return. With the corporatisation of healthcare practices going on, well-managed, profitable practices will attract a premium price. Now, if you choose to sell the practice, you're in the bargaining seat, not them. So the corporates won't be in a position to come to you and offer to bail you out, so you can then just become one of the employees on the hamster wheel. So the good news, it's not about whether you have the complete ability to do this all right now. It is about, though, whether you can take one step now and then learn the rest as you go, with some help along the way, of course. So what you need to win in this business of healthcare is the right plan, the right systems, and the right help. So what now? You have a choice to make. You can click away, forget everything I've just told you. That's fine, but it also means you go back to your old results. Nothing will change. If you really want things to be different and to change your life in this area, then I can help, and here's how. I did tell you there would be a gift at the end, and yes, we're just about at the end. So I've set aside some time in the next 48 hours to speak to 15 people, just 15, about how you can apply these ideas to your life starting today. Whatever your biggest problem is, I know how to solve it. On a 45-minute call, I'll help you in 3 ways. The first thing I'll do is talk to you about your biggest challenge that's happening right now. The second thing is I'll help you solve it. And the third thing is I'll set out a step-by-step plan on how you can reach your end goals without all the issues you currently face in your practice. So just a reminder, who's this for? It's for clinicians who want to improve their practice. It's for practice owners who are tired of staff and HR issues. It's for professionals who are prepared to learn something new and improve. It's also for owners who want to understand and manage their risk. So if you can say yes to all of this, then I'm happy to help you for free during a 45-minute strategy consultation. Why am I doing this? Well, if we make a connection and you're absolutely positive I can help you achieve your goals, then you may want to apply to work with me. If it's a win-win for both of us, fantastic. If not, that's no issue either. So we have a 48-hour window available to only 15 people. Click on the button now and you'll be taken to my online calendar where you can tee up a time for me to call you at a time that suits you. And just to remind you, on this call, 45 minutes, I'll help you in 3 ways. I'll talk to you about your biggest challenge that's happening right now. I will help you solve it. And I'll set out a step-by-step plan so you can reach your goal without all the issues you're currently facing in your practice. So click on the button that you see below, make a decision to make a positive change, and I look forward to chatting with you very soon. Thanks again for your attention.